Welcome to the ultimate guide for conquering the Stonevault dungeon in World of Warcraft, The War Within. Whether you're simply aiming to time the key or pushing for a flawless run, this video is your means to mastering one of the most challenging dungeons in the expansion. We'll break down the essential tips for a swift and efficient clear. We'll delve into the deadly trash mobs that stand in your way, and most importantly provide an in-depth analysis of every boss encounter. Ready to turn your team into legends? Disclaimer: the tooltip values shown may not reflect current tuning from Blizzard and will vary between key levels. Now let's get started. The beginning pulls of the dungeon have a couple of noteworthy mobs that we will quickly mention. The ghastly Void Souls cast an AoE, Howling Fear, that should be kicked or stunned. Interrupting their fear is priority. The Earth-infused Golems cast a Seismic Wave Frontal at a random player that will stun you for 3 seconds. They also cast Ground Pound, which slows and deals damage to players within 30 yards. The repurposed Loaderbot cast, Pulverizing Pounce, at a random player, which knocks you back if you are in the ground swirl. Last, the Curseheart Invaders curse players with a dot that ticks every 2 seconds for 12 seconds called Void Infection. They also cast Arcing Void on the current tank that arcs to up to 3 other nearby players for partial damage. The last pull before the boss have mobs that fear, so you probably want to pull these groups separately. EDNA. When cast, volatile spikes will be created on the ground. Stepping on a spike causes it to explode, doing damage and knocking back everyone within 4 yards. When EDNA casts Refracting Beam at players, they should point it at the volatile spikes in order to break them, but doing so will cause party-wide damage in the form of a stacking debuff. The beam itself causes fire damage, so players should not overlap beams and should not be near the spikes when they detonate. Players can use immunities to break multiple spikes if needed. At 100 energy EDNA casts Earth Shatterer, all players will take nature damage and all remaining volatile spikes will be detonated instantly, causing additional party-wide damage via the stacking debuff. Notable for healers in the tank is when EDNA periodically cast Seismic Smash. This does massive single-target damage to the target tank and afflicts them with Seismic Reverberation, a debuff that is a magic dot that can be dispelled and does nature damage every 3 seconds for 30 seconds. When it is dispelled, Stone Shield is applied to the target tank. Stone Shield is a buff that reduces 50% of the damage taken by the target for 5 seconds. Ideally, Seismic Reverberation should be dispelled, giving the tank Stone Shield just before EDNA casts Seismic Smash to reduce what otherwise may be lethal damage to the tank. Skarmorak Trash. Void-bound Despoilers will cast an uninterruptible channeled Void Outburst that pulses massive party-wide damage and may require a healer cooldown or personal defensive abilities to survive, especially on high-level keys. Engine Speakers cast Concussive Smash that does significant damage and applies a slow debuff. Void-bound Howlers cast Piercing Wail that does damage and causes a 14-second debuff that increases the damage that the next Piercing Wail causes. Void-touched Elemental cast Crystal Salvo, putting a purple swirl on the ground, doing damage to anyone inside. Probably the most important thing to know in this wing is the turn speaker mobs that cast Censoring Gear and will silence their target for 3 seconds. This should be the priority interrupt. Skarmorak will begin by casting Crystalline Smash, which will slam down, inflicting shadow damage while fracturing off pieces that land around the room, doing damage to players within 6 yards of impact. Each fracture will create a crystal shard upon landing. Destroying a crystal shard causes Crystalline Eruption and does party-wide damage and stacks a debuff that lasts a few seconds. So you want to let the debuff fall off between destroying them in order to prevent the debuff from stacking, or the damage will be deadly. Any crystals that are not destroyed will buff the boss's shell when Phase 2 begins. Skarmorak will also cast Unstable Crash that creates a 15-yard AoE around the boss, doing massive shadow damage to anyone inside. During this cast, unstable fragments will also spawn around the room that players can collect. These fragments will do dot damage every 2 seconds to anyone who collects them, but also gives the player unstable energy, which is a 50% buff to overall healing and increased damage done to the boss's shell. The dot and buffs last for 30 seconds and stack for each orb picked up. Getting a new orb does indeed refresh the buff. We recommend allowing a healer to collect a minimum of 1 or more fragments in order to maintain their buff for the entire fight. as there is a massive amount of pulsing damage in Phase 2. Each DPS should try to collect an orb just before Phase 2 when the boss casts his shell. Phase 2 begins when the boss reaches 0 energy and begins to channel Fortified Shell, and he will absorb any remaining crystal shards that were not destroyed. Then the boss will channel Void Discharge, which will pulse massive party-wide damage. This damage stacks, increasing by 10% for every pulse that goes off until his shell is broken. Once the shell is broken, he will be stunned for 2 seconds. When the boss is defeated, look for the glowing minecart to quickly transport you back to the middle of the dungeon.
Look for a service tunnel nearby.
Forge Speaker Trash. There's a lot of trash in this section, good for getting percentage. Aspiring Forge Hand may be one of the most notable that cast Fracture, that puts a stacking debuff on you that increases damage taken by 5%. These stack up fast and can quickly overwhelm the tank and healer if not dealt with. Forge-bound Menders cast a 40% heal that can be interrupted called Restoring Metals, which is the priority kick here. They also cast Alloy Bolt doing direct damage as well. The large Forge loaders cast both a frontal blast called Lava Cannon that does direct damage and leaves a 10 seconds dot to anyone who gets hit. They also cast a 15-second unavoidable dot called Molten Mortar on a random player. One last thing to mention in this wing's trash is the patrol of non-elite aspiring Forge Hand. It's tempting to pull them into another group. However, it is advisable to pull them separately due to the crazy amount of fracture stacks the tank will get. Forge Speakers. These two bosses must die within a few seconds of each other, or Silenced Speaker becomes active, pulsing massive party-wide damage which easily becomes a wipe, so make sure to split DPS evenly. Speaker Dorlita will stay toward the middle of the room where they will strike the tank with Igneous Hammer doing heavy damage. Speaker Brock will alternate between the middle and the sides of the room. Speaker Dorlita will also fire Lava Cannon toward a random player doing massive damage and leaving a heavy dot on anyone hit. Brock will frequently cast Molten Metal, which applies a heavy dot to all players and will slow them for 8 seconds. This ability is very dangerous and must be kicked every time. We recommend you assign 2 alternating interrupts to melee while they are in the middle of the room, and have 1 ranged assigned to interrupt Brock when he jumps to the side of the room. Also, when Brock jumps to the side, he will activate Scrap Song, sending a metal scrap cube surging across the middle of the room, doing massive damage and stunning anyone hit for 3 seconds. Brock frequently will cast Exhaust Vents, which activates 3 of the 4 vents in the room, Firebat, which will then fire Here Good, flaming scrap spawning fire pools all over the ground. After Brock returns to the middle of the room, Dorlita will pull the metal cube back to the middle of the room, which must be dodged again. The cube will activate Blazing Crescendo, then explode, sending waves of lava in 4 directions. During this phase, it is crucial to identify which vent is clear several seconds before the vents erupt. Then players can stand near or on it while avoiding the lava waves and pools during eruption. This is a very busy and challenging fight. As said before, use the minecart after defeating this boss to quickly teleport back to the middle of the dungeon. High Speaker Eirich Trash. Curseforge Honor Guards will cast Shield Stampede telegraphed by blue arrows on the ground that will stun anyone hit for 2 seconds, so make sure to avoid these. The large Rock Smashers will cast Smash Rock that does direct damage. It does a knockback and also puts a 30-second debuff on anyone hit and increases damage taken from Smash Rock by 10%. Tanks must make sure to turn this enemy away so party members don't get hit. They also cast Granite Eruption, which anyone in the swirl takes damage and gets knocked into the air. Last notable mob here are Stone Shapers, which will spam Stonevault, doing a lot of direct damage. They also cast Earthburst Totem that will explode for heavy damage after 7 seconds, so make sure to interrupt the casts and hard focus the totems when they are up. High Speaker Eirich. The last boss of the dungeon. At the start of the encounter, there are 2 Void Rift portals open. The boss will start by casting Unbridled Void, which is an easy-to-dodge frontal cone attack. Then he will cast Void Corruption, putting a debuff on all players that inflicts shadow damage every 3 seconds. The damage this debuff does will increase the longer a player is afflicted with it. It can only be removed by moving within 15 yards of a Void Rift to consume it. As you get near the Void Rift, it will pull you toward it. If you come within 3 yards of the rift, you will be instantly killed, so you will have to avoid being pulled in while removing your debuff. The void rifts will despawn and respawn in a new location every time they consume a void corruption. Next, the boss will cast Entropic Reckoning, which immediately puts a large blue circle around all players. After about 3 seconds, he will finish channeling and the circles will drop large void pools on the ground. It is okay to stack these circles so they drop the pools on top of each other, but you want to drop them toward the edge of the room without blocking access to the portals. And there you have it, heroes, the complete breakdown of the Stonevault dungeon. With these strategies in your arsenal, you're now ready to tackle every challenge this dungeon throws at you. From trash mobs to the final boss, nothing will stand in your way. If this guide helped sharpen your skills, be sure to subscribe to the channel to help it grow so we can release new guides each week. Until next time, keep your blades sharp, your spells ready, and may your loot be legendary.